Hello, this is George Hutton, and you are listening to the Mind Persuasion Podcast. Today we continue our study of Money Brain. For more information, please visit mindpersuasion.com/money-brain. Today's podcast will talk about a particularly uncomfortable and difficult topic: money time travel. We've touched on this briefly last podcast, and now we'll fully explore it, and that is the idea of debt. Today, debt is everywhere. Governments would vanish if they couldn't use debt. Most companies would vanish if they couldn't use debt. But that doesn't mean that you, dear listener, must use debt. First, we'll talk about debt as it exists in our deep instinctive minds. Then we'll talk about basic monetary debt. And then we'll look at good debt and bad debt. Vampire bats. Plenty of animals practice tit for tat, and they do it over time. Monkeys pick bugs out of each other's backs, but they remember who did what for whom. Many anthropologists believe this serves as a kind of social glue, and it very well may be the precursor to human gossip. When we gossip with one another, we also tend to keep score of who shares juicy information. While this is fascinating, our main point here is to focus on the realization that lower animals have a basic capacity for remembering debts. An interesting animal that does this is vampire bats. They go out every night hunting for blood. The ones that get plenty of blood share it with those who get nothing, but they keep score, meaning if you went out and had a good night and you shared it with your buddy, you would keep track of that blood debt. The entire group of bats would. If somebody received free blood but never paid it back when they had a good night, nobody would give him any more free blood. This sounds very much like Adam Smith's idea of real bills, or IOUs, given by neighbors and used as money. While the vampire bats don't exactly convert their shared blood into a monetary system, they very much do keep track of who is honest and who isn't. This is very much like an instinctive bat credit system. So when you do a favor for a friend and remember if they do or don't pay you back, this is essentially the same thing. When neighbors write each other IOUs and then this IOU becomes a piece of currency, this currency is riding on top of this ancient instinct. So the idea of loaning money and expecting to be paid back is really not much different than these ancient instincts. Debt versus savings. We can look at pure debt, and then we'll see how some debt is good and some debt is bad. Before that, we'll look at debt as a pure entity. When you borrow money that you don't currently have, this is essentially money you are taking from your future and spending it now. Remember our discussion about how savings is very similar to body fat, stored energy that can be used later when you either can't find energy or don't want to look, as in the case of a hibernating bear. When you borrow money, you are spending money you don't have. Once you spend it, you owe it. If you don't have any money and you borrow $1,000 from your friend, this is like spending money from your future. Because in the future, as soon as you get $1,000, you've got to give it to your friend. You can't use it yourself. Another way to look at debt is as negative money. If you borrow $1,000 and spend it, your savings balance is like being at negative $1,000. Meaning whenever you get $1,000 of real money, your savings balance will go to zero. These are two metaphorical ways of looking at debt. If you have a bank account that allows for overdrafts, then you are borrowing money from your bank. This borrowed money is reflected in your account as a negative balance. If you don't have a bank balance and you borrow money from a friend, the negative balance is more metaphorical, as is the spent money from your future. Obviously, if you borrow $1,000 from your friend, spent it, and then went out and got run over by a cement truck, you wouldn't have a future, and your friend would be out $1,000. The main point here is that debt is the opposite of savings. The more money you have saved up, either in the bank as investments or buried in your backyard, this represents time in the future when you have money that doesn't require any kind of work. Debt is the opposite. The more debt you have, the more time in the future when you will have to work but won't get any money. The more money you have saved, the more money you can spend in the future without having to work. The more debt you have, the more you'll have to work in the future without getting any money. Good debt and bad debt. When you use debt to purchase productive assets, it is good debt. Or if you use the debt to turn yourself into a more productive person, this is good debt. Put even more simply, if you use the debt in any way that will help you create more money than the debt, then this is good debt. For example, you might buy stock with your credit card. If the stock goes up and you sell the stock and can pay off the debt, the interest, and have some left over, then it was good debt. If you use your credit card to buy stock and the company goes bankrupt, then it's bad debt. If you use debt to pay for your education and end up with a 6-figure career, it was good debt. If you use debt to pay for your education and you end up working at Starbucks, then it was bad debt. If you use debt to buy a house and the value of the house goes way up, then it was good debt. If you use debt to buy a house and the house gets swallowed by a sinkhole, then it was bad debt. As you can clearly see, whether debt is good or bad depends on what happens in the future. And since nobody knows what is going to happen in the future, using debt is always going to have some risk. Debt and interest. Some futures are easier to predict than other futures. The more the lender, the person loaning you the money, believes you can pay them back, the lower interest you'll be charged. The less they believe you, the higher the interest they'll charge. If you are using debt to buy an asset, then the interest will generally be a bit lower because if worse comes to worse, whoever loaned you the money can simply take the asset, house or car, etc., and sell it to get some of their money back. Unsecured debt, or debt that is simply lent, like on a credit card, has much higher interest. Interest is the cost of money. One simplified way to look at interest is the cost of money. When you buy a hot dog, you must pay. When you buy a movie ticket, you must pay. When you borrow money, you must pay. The higher the interest rate, the higher the cost of money. Strictly speaking, borrowing money is like renting money. You borrow money, use it for a time, and then give it back. The additional amount that you must give back above the amount you borrowed is the fee or the interest or the price. The more they trust you'll pay them back, the less they'll charge you to rent their money. The less they trust you or believe you'll pay them back, the more they'll charge you to rent their money. This is George Hutton. Thank you for listening to the Mind Persuasion Podcast. For more information, please visit mindpersuasion.com/money-brain. I look forward to speaking with you again soon.